When 5-year-old Anukika's father picked her up from kindergarten, it was supposed to be a normal custody weekend. Instead, he crashed his car, woke up with no memory, and Annika was gone. For a year, the investigation stalled between the possibilities of a tragic accident or a violent carjacking. On the anniversary of the disappearance, Anukika's mother was finalizing the sale of the family home when a notification appeared on her phone. Annika's backpack detected nearby. What she found under the floor would prove the entire year-long search had been deliberately sent in the wrong direction from the very beginning. The smell of industrial strength. Bleach was almost worse than the dust. It was an aggressive chemical odor that sought to sanitize and erase, but it couldn't scour away the memories embedded in the drywall of the Colorado home. Leah Harding stood perfectly still in the center of what had been the master bedroom. It was June 2022, and the afternoon sunlight, unfiltered by curtains, cut harsh, unforgiving rectangles across the bare hardwood floors. The house, situated in a quiet, affluent Denver suburb, felt hollowed out, a husk. The silence echoed, feeling less like peace and more like a suffocating void. Downstairs, she could hear the muffled voice of Brenda, the realtor, a woman whose relentless cheerfulness Leah found grating. Brenda was finalizing the paperwork with the buyers, a young couple whose eager anticipation felt like a personal affront. The closing, the word felt sharp in Leah's mind, a finalizing severing. This was the final tether connecting her to the life she had built with Ryan, and the life that had shattered exactly 1 year ago today. A year, 365 days of grey fog, of moving through a world that felt muted and distant. A year since her 5-year-old daughter, Anukika, had vanished. The timeline was a dull agony Leah carried in her bones. A narrative repeated endlessly in police interviews, grief counseling sessions, and the hushed, pitying whispers of neighbors who no longer knew how to speak to her. Ryan, her newly minted ex-husband, the divorce finalized just weeks before the incident. A messy affair poisoned by financial betrayals, had picked Anukika up from kindergarten for his scheduled custody weekend. It was a Friday, bright and deceptively normal. Leah could picture it too easily, the memory a loop that played behind her eyes every time she closed them. Annika skipping out of the school doors, her gray shirt with the large, textured pink heart slightly askew. Her vibrant pink tights clashing wonderfully with her denim skirt. The backpack black with small pink hearts bouncing as she ran to Ryan's car, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. The CCTV footage confirmed it. They left the parking lot at 3:15 p.m. Hours later, Ryan's SUV was found 50 meters away, mangled against a cluster of ancient pines off a remote, winding mountain road, a place he had no reason to be, a treacherous stretch of highway that led deep into the wilderness. Ryan had survived. He was pulled from the wreckage with a severe concussion, multiple fractures, and a story that offered nothing but agonizing silence. Total retrograde amnesia, the doctors called it, their voices carefully neutral, a clean slate from the moment he drove away from the kindergarten. He didn't remember the drive. He didn't remember the crash. He didn't remember where his daughter was. Anukika was simply gone. No trace of her at the crash site. No clothing snagged on the branches. No footprints in the soft earth. The investigation wavered between two agonizing possibilities. She had been ejected during the crash and lost to the vast, unforgiving wilderness, or there had been an unknown altercation, a carjacking perhaps before the accident. Both scenarios ended in the same terrifying unknown, the same gaping void where her daughter used to be. Leah pressed the bridge of her nose, the emptiness of the house amplifying the void in her chest. This was supposed to be closure, a final step in the agonizing process of moving on. Instead, it felt like an amputation, a removal of a vital part of herself. She forced herself to move to complete the final walkthrough, a last inventory of absence. She moved toward the walk-in closet, a large space that Ryan had meticulously customized during the happier years of their marriage, a time that felt like a distant dream. It was stripped bare now, the shelving units creating a skeletal outline against the white walls, the space echoing with the silence of the house. She stepped over the threshold, the air cooler and stiller here, the scent of bleach slightly fainter. As she scanned the empty shelves one last time, a sharp vibration buzzed in her back pocket. Brenda, she assumed, calling to say the buyers were ready to sign. She pulled the phone out, glancing at the screen, preparing to force a smile she didn't feel. It wasn't a call. A notification bubble had popped up on the lock screen, stark white against her background photo. Annika smiling, her blonde hair catching the sunlight. The image, a daily dose of pain and hope. It was a Find My alert. Annika's backpack detected nearby. Leah stopped breathing. The world seemed to tilt, the silence rushing in her ears. That AirTag. She had clipped it inside Annika's backpack herself. A small, circular talisman against the anxieties of modern motherhood. A way to track her daughter's movements from the bus stop to the school door. It hadn't pinged once since the day Anukika disappeared. The police had searched for the signal extensively around the crash site, the helicopter sweeping the area for days. It was presumed lost, the battery dead, the device crushed. It was supposed to be gone forever. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, erratic rhythm that threatened to crack her chest open. She fumbled to unlock her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy, the screen blurring before her eyes. The app opened, the map interface giving way to the precise tracking screen. It was a vibrant, almost sickening green, the color of life, of hope, connecting. The seconds stretched, agonizing, the silence of the house feeling heavy, expectant. Then the screen stabilized. Here a large white arrow appeared, pointing straight ahead. Leah took a hesitant step forward, deeper into the closet. She felt like she was moving underwater, the air thick and resistant, the silence pressing in on her. The distance indicator updated, 20 ft ahead. She walked slowly, her eyes fixed on the screen, the green light casting an eerie glow on the empty shelves, the shadows dancing on the walls. She reached the back wall, the smooth drywall cold beneath her fingertips. 12 ft ahead. The arrow swiveled sharply to the right. She turned, facing the corner where Ryan used to keep his shoe rack, a space that always smelled faintly of leather and cedar, the ghost of his presence lingering in the air. 9 ft ahead, the arrow pointed straight down. Leah looked down at the hardwood floor, the smooth, polished surface reflecting the green light of the phone. The signal was strong, unwavering. It wasn't in the closet. It was under the closet. The realization didn't make sense. Why now?
She had been in this house dozens of times, supervising the packing and cleaning, the process of dismantling her life piece by piece.
Perhaps it was the precise proximity. Maybe she had never stood in this exact spot, phone in hand since the move out. Maybe the signal had been dormant, waiting for her to come close enough to activate it. She knelt, running her fingers over the smooth, cool wood, searching for a seam, a gap, anything that might indicate an opening. The signal pulsed gently on the screen, here beneath her feet. The impossibility of it was suffocating, the hope terrifying. The pulsing green light on the screen felt less like a guide and more like an accusation, a silent indictment of the secrets hidden beneath the surface of her life. F below, Leah stared at the hardwood, her mind grappling with the impossibility of the signal, the implications swirling in a chaotic storm of fear and hope. A glitch, a ghost in the machine. But the technology was binary, ruthless in its precision. It was here or it wasn't, and the app insisted it was here. She examined the floorboards more closely, her eyes tracing the grain of the wood, searching for any anomaly. The corner of the closet where the signal was strongest. The planks seemed slightly uneven, the varnish worn differently, a subtle imperfection in the otherwise flawless surface. And then the memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden, a fragment of the past emerging from the fog of grief. Years ago, long before the gambling debts had consumed him, before the lies had poisoned their marriage, Ryan had installed a hidden access panel right here. He was paranoid about security, always talking about needing a safe place for valuables, for emergency cash, a secret compartment hidden from the world. She hadn't thought about it in years, dismissing it as another manifestation of his growing obsession with control. She pressed her fingers against the seam where two boards met, the gap almost invisible, expertly crafted. She pushed, trying to lift the edge, her fingernails scraping against the wood, the resistance firm, unyielding. It was stuck fast, sealed by time, dust, and perhaps the subtle shifting of the house's foundation. The weight of the past year pressing down on it. "Leah, they're here." Brenda's voice called cheerfully from downstairs, the sound shattering the silence, a jarring intrusion from a world that felt impossibly distant. Panic began to bubble up, hot and acidic, the urgency rising in her throat. The buyers were here. The closing was happening now. If she didn't get this open, she might lose the opportunity forever. The house would belong to strangers, the secrets buried beneath the floorboards, lost forever. She scrambled to her feet and ran, her footsteps echoing loudly in the empty house. The sound of frantic drum beat out against the silence. She sprinted down the stairs, nearly colliding with Brenda in the foyer, the realtor's smile faltering at the sight of Leah's pale face, her frantic energy. "Leah, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," Brenda asked, her voice laced with concern. "I forgot something," Leah muttered, pushing past her, ignoring the curious glances of the couple standing awkwardly by the door. The buyers, their faces eager, expectant, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the house they were about to claim as their own. She burst into the garage, the space echoing with the emptiness, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and concrete dust. The cleaning crew had left a few tools behind, piled in a corner for pickup, a testament to the finality of the move. Among them, she saw the heavy rusted head of a crowbar, the metal cold and menacing. She grabbed it, the weight of it grounding her, the cold metal a stark contrast to the heat of her panic, and ran back into the house. She took the stairs 2 at a time, the adrenaline masking any exhaustion. Her focus narrowed to a single point, the hidden compartment beneath the closet floor. Back in the closet, the green light continued its relentless pulse. "Here, here, here!" Leah didn't hesitate. She jammed the sharp end of the crowbar into the seam and pulled down with all her weight, the muscles in her arms straining with the effort. The wood groaned in protest, splinters flying, the sound of the destruction both violent and satisfying. She ignored the damage, the imminent sale, the sound of footsteps starting up the stairs, the muffled voices of Brenda and the buyers. She repositioned the bar, leveraging it against the adjacent plank, the metal biting into the wood. She pulled again, a guttural sound escaping her throat, the desperation fueling her strength. The panel suddenly gave way with a sharp crack swinging upward on hidden hinges. The mechanism surprisingly smooth after years of disuse. Below was a shallow crawl space, perhaps 2 ft deep, nestled between the floor joists. A dark void hidden beneath the surface of the house. The air that rushed up smelled stale, dusty, and faintly metallic, the scent of secrecy and neglect. Leah fumbled with her phone, switching from the tracking app to the flashlight, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device. She shone the beam into the dark, narrow gap. The light cut through the swirling dust mows, illuminating the cramped space, the rough concrete floor, the exposed wires and pipes. And there it was. Tucked against a support beam, half covered by a loose piece of insulation, was a small black backpack patterned with tiny pink hearts. Annika's backpack. Leah dropped the crowbar. It clattered loudly on the hardwood, the sound echoing in the silence. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She reached into the crawl space, her arm brushing against cobwebs, the rough edges of the floorboard scraping her skin. Her fingers closed around the familiar canvas fabric. It was real, tangible, a piece of the past emerging into the present. She pulled it out, clutching it to her chest, the weight of it light, empty. She unzipped the main compartment, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Inside was Anukika's lunchbox, empty, the remnants of a sandwich still clinging to the plastic, and a crumpled drawing of a butterfly. The colors faded but still vibrant. The discovery shattered the official timeline, the carefully constructed narrative of the past year crumbling into dust. If the backpack was here, it meant Ryan had stopped at this house, a house he had already moved out of after picking up Anukika from kindergarten. He had lied. The detour was intentional. The implications were staggering, terrifying. The amnesia, the confusion, it all felt suddenly suspect. A carefully crafted deception designed to hide the truth. Why come here? She shone the light back into the crawl space, the beam sweeping across the narrow space. Something else caught her eye. Deeper inside, the insulation looked disturbed, pulled away from the corner as if someone had been searching for something. She reached in, her arm extending as far as it would go, the rough edges of the floorboard scraping her skin. Her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic. She strained, reaching further, her body contorting to fit the narrow opening, and pulled it out. It was a metal lockbox, dark gray and heavy-duty. The kind Ryan used. The kind he kept hidden from her, from the world. She tried the latch. It was unlocked. She opened it. Empty. Leah knew exactly what was supposed to be in there. Ryan kept emergency cash hidden in this box. Several $1,000s he had hoarded away, hidden even from the divorce proceedings, a secret stash for his gambling habit. The realization hit her with chilling clarity, the pieces clicking into place. Ryan hadn't just stopped by the house. He came for the money. The backpack must have been left behind in the rush, forgotten or discarded in the frantic scramble for the cash. He took the cash, and then what? The crash, the disappearance, the silence. "Leah, what is going on up here? The buyers are waiting." Brenda's voice, sharp with annoyance, cut through the silence. She was standing in the doorway of the bedroom, the buyers hovering behind her, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern. Leah stood up, clutching the backpack and the empty lockbox, her mind reeling, the world tilting on its axis. The foundation of the past year, the accepted narrative of a tragic accident, had just crumbled beneath her feet, revealing a darker, more terrifying truth. "The sale is off," Leah said, her voice flat, unrecognizable, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Get out of my house. I need to call the police." Detective Merrick arrived 45 minutes later, trailed by a forensics team whose presence immediately transformed the hollow house into an active crime scene. The clinical efficiency of their movements, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos swirling in Leah's mind. Merrick was a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and a pragmatic demeanor that Leah had become intimately familiar with during the initial investigation. A man who dealt in facts, not emotions. He found Leah sitting on the stairs, the backpack and lockbox beside her like offerings to an indifferent god, her body trembling with the aftermath of the discovery. Merrick listened patiently as Leah recounted the discovery, her voice trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and renewed grief, the words tumbling out in a rush of fragmented sentences and desperate pleas. She explained the significance of the AirTag, the hidden compartment, the missing cash. She laid out the implications, the proof that Ryan had lied, that the disappearance was not an accident. "It means he was here, Detective," Leah insisted, her voice tight, the desperation bleeding through her words. "Ryan was here with Annika. He came back for the money. This wasn't a random accident. It was planned." Merrick nodded slowly, absorbing the information, his expression unreadable. He walked upstairs to the master closet, the forensics team already dusting for prints and photographing the exposed crawl space, their movements methodical, detached. He examined the splintered wood, the disturbed insulation, the empty lockbox. He was meticulous, methodical, giving nothing away, his silence amplifying the tension in the room. He returned to the hallway facing Leah, his eyes meeting hers, the weight of his skepticism palpable. "I understand why this feels like a breakthrough, Leah," Merrick said, his voice calm and measured. The practiced tone of a man accustomed to managing expectations, and it is significant. It confirms a stop we didn't know about. But we need to be careful about jumping to conclusions. We need to follow the evidence, not the emotion. He explained the procedural blind spots, the reasons why the house was never searched, the logic behind the initial investigation. Ryan had officially moved out 2 weeks prior to the incident, the divorce finalized, the separation clear. All the evidence, the traffic cams, the witness reports pointed toward the mountain road where the crash occurred. There was no probable cause to search the house at the time. It was a logical omission, a bureaucratic oversight, but one that now felt like a catastrophic failure. "The backpack confirms he stopped here," Merrick conceded, his voice softening slightly. "And the empty lockbox suggests he took the cash. That explains the detour, but it doesn't necessarily change what happened afterward. It doesn't tell us where Annika is." Leah stared at him, incredulous, the hope that had ignited in her chest, flickering, threatening to extinguish. The skepticism in his voice was a physical weight pressing down on her, a suffocating blanket of doubt. But the amnesia? If he planned to come here for the money, then the crash, it had to be staged. He's lying. The crash could still have been an accident, Merrick interrupted gently, anticipating her argument. His voice firm. He could have been distracted, agitated. Or the carjacking theory still holds. Maybe whoever took Annika forced him to retrieve the cash first. We don't know. We can't assume anything. He was trying to manage her expectations to cushion the blow of potential disappointment, to protect her from the agonizing cycle of hope and despair. But Leah didn't want comfort. She wanted action. She wanted justice. He cautioned her against interfering, warning her that Ryan's amnesia defense was a formidable obstacle, a legal fortress built on medical jargon and expert testimony. His cognitive issues are medically documented. Leah, we have neurologists willing to testify that the trauma of the crash caused genuine memory loss. Proving he's faking it, it's incredibly difficult. Medically and legally, it's a fortress. We can't just break down the door. The word fortress resonated with Leah. A fortress built of lies, protected by the very system that was supposed to protect her daughter. So what now? She asked, her voice flat, the hope draining out of her, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Now we process the scene, Merrick said, gesturing towards the flurry of activity in the closet. The clinical detachment of the investigation, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil raging inside her. We analyze the backpack for any trace evidence. We look at the timeline again with this new information. We'll try to interview Ryan again, see if this jogs his memory. We'll follow the evidence, Leah, wherever it leads. Leah knew exactly what that meant. They would ask Ryan. He would deny remembering and the case would stall again. The investigation caught in the gears of bureaucracy and skepticism. The police were bound by the rules of evidence, by the slow grind of justice. But Leah wasn't. She stood up, the determination hardening in her chest, the grief transforming into a cold, focused rage. If the police couldn't break through Ryan's facade, she would have to do it herself. The skepticism of the authorities wasn't a deterrent. It was a catalyst. She was alone in this just as she had been for the past year, and she would not be deterred. She would find the truth. She would find Anukika. The drive to the long-term care facility was a blur of highway lines and rising fury. The scenery passing by unnoticed. The world outside the car window muted and distant. Leah gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, the leather groaning under the pressure, the tension in her body, a physical manifestation of the turmoil in her mind. Merrick's cautious skepticism echoed in her mind, fueling her frustration, the dismissal of her instincts, a familiar ache. They saw Ryan as a victim, a grieving father incapacitated by trauma, a broken man deserving of sympathy. Leah saw the man behind the mask, the man who had lied to her for years about the gambling, the debts, the slow erosion of their life together. The man who had always prioritized his own needs, above hers, above Anukika's. The facility, Mountain View Rehabilitation, was a sterile, quiet place. The architecture modern and impersonal, smelling of antiseptic and the faint, depressing odor of institutional food. The silence was heavy, oppressive, broken only by the occasional beep of a medical device, the muffled sound of a television. Ryan resided here due to his lingering physical injuries from the crash, a fractured femur that hadn't healed properly, requiring months of physical therapy and his professed cognitive issues. He needed assistance with daily tasks, a convenient shield against the hard questions, a way to retreat from the world and the consequences of his actions. Leah navigated the hallways, her footsteps loud on the linoleum floor, the sound echoing in the silence. She found him in the common area, a brightly lit room with large windows overlooking the manicured lawn, the view a mockery of the confinement of the residence. He was sitting in a wheelchair staring out at the sunlight, a blanket draped over his lap. He looked smaller than she remembered, his face pale and drawn, the vitality drained from him, the charming smile replaced by a vacant expression. He looked like a broken man, but Leah knew how deceptive appearances could be. She knew the darkness that lurked beneath the surface, the manipulation hidden behind the facade of vulnerability. She walked up to him, stopping directly in front of his wheelchair, blocking the sunlight, casting a shadow over his face. Ryan turned, his eyes widening in surprise, the recognition instantaneous, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second before he regained control. "Leah, what are you doing here?" His voice was hesitant, uncertain, perfectly calibrated to convey confusion. The performance seamless, practiced. Leah didn't waste time with pleasantries. She didn't sit down. She stood over him. The power dynamic shifted, the anger simmering beneath the surface of her calm demeanor. "I was at the house," she said, her voice cold and steady, finalizing the sale. Saying goodbye, Ryan flinched slightly, the mention of the house a painful reminder of the life he had destroyed. The house, right? I heard it's sold. That's good. You deserve a fresh start. The words felt hollow, insincere. I found the backpack, Ryan. Ryan blinked, his expression shifting to confusion, the performance escalating. The backpack? I don't understand. What backpack? Annika's backpack. The black one with the pink hearts. The one she was wearing when you picked her up. I found it at the house. In the closet, Leah said, her gaze locked on his, searching for any crack in the facade, any flicker of recognition. Under the floorboards, in the crawl space, Ryan reacted with apparent distress, his hands trembling in his lap, his breathing shallow. He shook his head, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route, a way to avoid the truth. I don't remember going back to the house, Leah. I don't remember anything from that day. The doctor said the trauma. I also found the lockbox, Leah continued, pressing him, her voice rising slightly, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. The one where you kept your emergency cash, the one you thought I didn't know about. It was empty. This was the moment. Leah watched him closely, her eyes narrowed, her senses heightened, and she saw it. When she mentioned the missing cash, something flickered in his eyes. It was minute, a fleeting tightening around his eyelids, a momentary stillness in his trembling hands. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't grief. It was panic, genuine visceral panic. The panic of a man caught in a lie, his carefully constructed world threatening to collapse. It lasted only a second before he masked it, his expression crumpling into simulated anguish, the performance resuming with renewed intensity. The cash? Why would I take the cash? Leah, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't remember the crash. I don't know where she is. He pleaded, his voice rising in pitch, the desperation sounding almost real. A nurse drawn by the commotion approached quickly, her expression concerned, her movements brisk and efficient. Is everything all right here, Mr. Harding? Are you okay? Ryan immediately shifted his attention to the nurse, his distress magnifying, the performance escalating into a full-blown meltdown. She's upsetting me. She's confusing me. I can't remember. Please make her leave. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking, the sound of his sobs echoing in the quiet room. Leah didn't move. She held his gaze, letting him see the certainty in her eyes, the realization that she knew the truth. The performance was convincing, honed over a year of interviews and evaluations, a masterpiece of deception. But that flicker of panic had betrayed him. It had confirmed everything. He's fine, Leah said to the nurse, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She turned and walked away, leaving Ryan in the sunlight, his facade firmly back in place, the mask hiding the darkness within. As she pushed through the doors of the facility, the cold air hit her face, the contrast with the stifling atmosphere of the rehabilitation center, stark, invigorating. The confrontation had yielded no confession, no sudden revelation, no breakthrough for the investigation. But it had given her something more important, something that Merrick and his team couldn't find with their forensic tools and psychological evaluations. The absolute certainty that Ryan's amnesia was a lie. And if he was lying, he knew where Anukika was. The void wasn't empty. It was hiding a secret Leah was determined to uncover. If the amnesia was fake, then the disappearance was planned. The certainty of this realization was a cold fire in Leah's veins, burning away the fog of grief and uncertainty that had paralyzed her for the past year. She needed to understand the sequence of events to prove that the detour to the house was intentional and significant, a calculated move in a desperate game. The backpack was the key, the physical evidence that shattered the official narrative, but the timeline was the lock, the intricate mechanism that held the truth hidden. The next morning, the sky a pale, washed-out blue, she drove to Anukika's kindergarten. It was a place she had avoided for the past year, the sight of the colorful playground equipment and the cheerful murals too painful to bear, a reminder of the innocence that had been stolen from her daughter. The Little Sprouts Learning Center sign, with its whimsical font and bright colors, felt like a mockery, a symbol of a world that no longer existed for her. She met with Ms. Gable, Annika's teacher, a kind woman whose eyes still held the shadow of the tragedy, the grief lingering beneath the surface of her professional demeanor. Leah explained the discovery of the backpack, the need to confirm the timeline with absolute certainty, the urgency of her quest for the truth. "Was Annika wearing the backpack when she left with Ryan that day?" Leah asked, her voice tight, desperate for confirmation, for a solid foundation upon which to build her case. Ms. Gable nodded emphatically without hesitation, the memory vivid in her mind. "Yes, absolutely. She was so proud of it, she never took it off. I helped her put it on before she left. She wanted to show her father the drawing she made, the butterfly." She paused, her expression clouding, the memory shifting from the joyful child to the distracted father. "Ryan was in a hurry. I remember that. He seemed agitated, frazzled. He rushed her out the door, barely saying goodbye. I remember thinking he seemed stressed, but I knew about the divorce, the financial issues. I assumed it was related to that. Stressed, agitated, a man preparing to disappear, not a father embarking on a leisurely custody weekend, a man driven by a desperate urgency, a hidden agenda." Leah asked if the security footage from that day still existed, the digital record of the last time Annika was seen. Miss Gable explained that the footage was archived, stored on a cloud server, a silent witness to the tragedy. She promised to retrieve it, understanding the urgency in Leah's request, the need to revisit the past to understand the present. An hour later, Leah was sitting in the small, cluttered office, the air thick with the smell of crayons and glue, watching the grainy video on a computer screen. The digital clock in the corner ticked forward, the seconds stretching agonizingly. There they were. Ryan walking quickly, his stride long and purposeful, his hand on Anukika's shoulder, guiding her towards the parking lot. His grip tight, almost forceful, and Annika skipping beside him, the black backpack with the pink hearts clearly visible on her back, a symbol of her innocence, her vulnerability. The timestamp on the video read 3:15 p.m. Leah watched the footage repeatedly, memorizing every detail, every nuance of their movements. Ryan's tense posture, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the parking lot, scanning for threats, for witnesses. Annika's innocent excitement, the joy in her movements, the trust in her father. The contrast was heartbreaking, terrifying. She drove home, her mind racing, the timeline unfolding before her like a map. She pulled up Google Maps on her laptop, charting the route from the kindergarten to the crash site, the distance, the estimated travel time. It was a 45-minute drive, even with moderate traffic. A straightforward route that led directly into the mountains. She then looked at the police reports from the accident, the thick files she had obsessed over for months, the details memorized, the unanswered questions haunting her. The crash was reported by a passing motorist at 6:05 p.m., nearly 3 hours. The drive should have taken 45 minutes. The stop at the house explained the detour, the deviation from the expected route. The house was about 20 minutes from the kindergarten in the opposite direction of the crash site. If Ryan drove there, retrieved the cash, say 30 minutes inside the house, a generous estimate for the time needed to access the crawl space and empty the lockbox, and then drove to the crash site. That would account for approximately an hour and a half. But that still left almost an hour and a half unaccounted for. A gap in the timeline, a void in the narrative. Where were they during those 90 minutes? The timeline didn't just suggest intent, it screamed it. This contradicted the theory of a random accident or a sudden carjacking. A carjacking would have been chaotic, frantic, a desperate struggle for control. This timeline felt deliberate, methodical, a carefully orchestrated sequence of events leading to a predetermined outcome. Ryan had time. Time to take the cash. Time to drive somewhere else before the crash. Time to do something with Anukika. Time to make her disappear. Leah realized she was only scratching the surface. The discovery of the backpack opening a door into a darkness she hadn't known existed. A labyrinth of deception and betrayal. If the disappearance was planned, she needed to understand why. And the answer, she suspected, lay not in the timeline, not in the logistics of the disappearance, but in the chaos of Ryan's life before the crash. The financial ruin that had driven him to desperation, the secrets he kept hidden from the world. The root of their divorce, the reason their marriage had disintegrated, the catalyst for the destruction of their life together was Ryan's gambling. It had started small recreational poker games with friends, a harmless diversion that provided an escape from the pressures of work, the responsibilities of fatherhood. But it had escalated quickly, insidiously consuming his attention, his savings, their future, the addiction taking hold of him like a virus, rewriting his personality, his priorities. By the time Leah filed for divorce, Ryan was drowning in debt. His life a chaotic mess of lies and desperation. The charming, ambitious man she had married replaced by a stranger, a man obsessed with the next bet, the next win. If the disappearance was related to the debt, Leah needed to understand the scope of the problem, the depth of the abyss into which Ryan had fallen. She needed to see the full picture, the darkness she had averted her eyes from, the reality she had tried to ignore. She called her divorce attorney, Sarah Jenkins. Jenkins was a sharp, pragmatic woman who had navigated the complexities of Ryan's finances with ruthless efficiency. A fierce advocate who had protected Leah from the fallout of his recklessness. Leah asked her to review the detailed financial disclosures again, the records she had previously avoided looking at, wanting only to be free of Ryan, not mired in the details of his ruin, the extent of his betrayal. Leah met Jenkins at her downtown office, a sleek, modern space overlooking the Denver skyline. The view expansive, breathtaking, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic reality of Leah's life. Jenkins had the files spread out on the conference table, a daunting stack of bank statements, credit reports, and legal documents. A monument to Ryan's deception, a testament to the double life he had led. "When you called and told me about the backpack, I started digging deeper," Jenkins said, her expression grave, the professional detachment replaced by a genuine concern. "During the divorce, our focus was on asset division, on protecting your interests, on securing a settlement that would allow you to rebuild your life. We didn't necessarily need to understand the full extent of his liabilities, only what impacted the marital estate. We knew it was bad, Leah, but I didn't realize how bad. I didn't realize the danger you were in." Jenkins pointed to a series of large wire transfers, amounts that made Leah feel nauseous, the numbers blurring before her eyes. Tens of thousands of dollars disappearing into the ether, vanishing without a trace. Ryan took extreme measures to hide the extent of his debt. He was borrowing from one source to pay another. A classic Ponzi scheme of personal finance, a desperate attempt to keep the balls in the air. He was juggling credit cards, taking out payday loans, liquidating retirement accounts, forging your signature on loan applications. He was a desperate man, Leah, a man capable of anything. Leah looked at the numbers, the sheer scale of the debt staggering, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. It was far larger and more complex than she had initially realized, hundreds of thousands of dollars. The realization that she had been living with this level of deception, this level of risk, was chilling. The foundation of their life together built on a lie. But who did he owe this money to? Leah asked, her voice trembling, the fear rising in her throat. The banks, credit card companies, the IRS. Who was he so afraid of? Jenkins shook her head slowly, the movement heavy with implication, the silence stretching agonizingly. That's the problem, Leah. Most of this debt isn't institutional. It's private. It's owed to people who don't play by the rules. She pulled out a document, a forensic accounting report commissioned during the divorce. The analysis dense, filled with technical jargon, but the conclusion clear, undeniable. These wire transfers they trace back to shell corporations, offshore accounts, entities designed to conceal the true nature of the transactions. This isn't standard debt. This is shadow debt, money borrowed from the darkness. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, the silence of the conference room, amplifying the fear in Leah's heart. Ryan hadn't just ruined his own life. He had entangled himself with something far more dangerous, something that operated outside the confines of the law, something that threatened not just his financial stability, but his life. The financial ruin wasn't just about money. It was about the people he owed it to, people who didn't operate within the confines of the law, people who used violence to collect their debts. Jenkins hesitated, weighing her words carefully, the silence in the room stretching, heavy with unspoken fears. She looked at Leah, her expression softening with a mixture of pity and concern, the professional mask slipping to reveal the vulnerability beneath. Leah, there's something I didn't fully disclose during the divorce. I didn't want to alarm you, and frankly, I wanted to finalize the proceedings as quickly as possible for your safety. I thought once the divorce was finalized, you and Anukisa would be insulated from the fallout. I thought the danger would pass. Leah braced herself, the tension in the room palpable, the air thick with anticipation. What is it, Sarah? Tell me. I need to know the truth. Ryan's debts weren't just private. They were owed to high-level loan sharks, people connected to organized crime, Jenkins said, her voice low, barely above a whisper, the words hanging heavy in the air, the implication terrifying. The words hit Leah like a physical blow, the breath rushing out of her lungs. Organized crime. It sounded like something out of a movie, a sensationalized plot twist, not something that touched her life, her daughter, her reality. The reality of it was terrifying, the abstract fear coalescing into something concrete, something immediate. How do you know? Leah whispered, the sound strangled, the fear gripping her heart. Because they contacted me, Jenkins said, her eyes dark with the memory, the fear still lingering beneath the surface. During the asset investigation, when we started digging into those shell corporations, when we started demanding transparency about the offshore accounts, when we started uncovering the extent of his deception, I received threats, credible threats, threats that I couldn't ignore. Jenkins leaned forward, her eyes locking with Leah's, the intensity of her gaze conveying the seriousness of the situation. They weren't subtle, Leah. They were explicit. They warned me to drop the inquiry into Ryan's finances. They told me that if I didn't, they would go after him and not just him. Jenkins paused, the silence stretching heavy with the unspoken words, the implication hanging in the air like a guillotine. They threatened Annika. Leah felt the blood drain from her face, the room tilting slightly, the world outside the window blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. The abstract fear that had haunted her for a year suddenly coalesced into a terrifying reality. This changed everything. The disappearance wasn't just about debt. It was about survival, a desperate, misguided attempt to protect their daughter from the monsters he had invited into their life. The image of Ryan at the care facility, his feigned confusion, his desperate performance suddenly made a twisted kind of sense. He wasn't just hiding from the police. He was hiding from them. The amnesia was a shield protecting him, and in his mind protecting Annika, a desperate gamble to neutralize the threat. If they threatened Annika, Leah said, her voice trembling, the implications swirling in her mind, then maybe they took her. Maybe the carjacking theory was right. Maybe they forced him to crash the car. Maybe they have her. It's possible, Jenkins conceded, her voice grave. But if they took her, why the elaborate charade with the crash, the amnesia? Why wouldn't Ryan cooperate with the police? Tell them who took her? Why no ransom demand? Why the silence? Leah shook her head, overwhelmed, the pieces still not fitting, the puzzle becoming more complex, more terrifying. If Ryan was trying to protect Anukika, why put her in danger in the first place? Why the silence? Why the deception? Jenkins, meanwhile, was still shuffling through the files, her brow furrowed, searching for something, a clue, a lead, anything that might shed light on the darkness. There's something else. Something I overlooked during the initial chaos. A detail that seemed insignificant at the time, but now it feels important. She pulled out a small yellow post-it note tucked deep within a stack of Ryan's bank statements. The flimsy paper, a stark contrast to the heavy weight of the financial documents. It looked like it had been hastily stuck there, perhaps fallen off another document, a forgotten detail in the chaotic mess of Ryan's life. On it, written in Ryan's distinctive hurried scroll, was a single phone number, no name attached, just 10 digits. This number doesn't match any of his known contacts, Jenkins said, sliding the note across the table, the yellow paper glowing under the harsh light of the conference room. It's probably nothing, a wrong number, a business contact. But given the circumstances, it feels like a loose end, a thread waiting to be pulled. Leah took the note, the flimsy paper feeling heavy with significance. The 10 digits a cryptic message from the past. It was a fragment of Ryan's hidden life, a thread pulling her deeper into the darkness. A darkness that now had a name, a shape, a terrifying reality. A darkness that threatened to consume her daughter. Leah took the phone number and the information about the threats directly to Detective Merrick. She didn't call. She drove to the police station, the urgency propelling her forward, the need for answers overriding her fear. The mention of organized crime instantly changed the atmosphere in the sterile interview room, the air crackling with a newfound tension. Merrick's pragmatic skepticism gave way to a focused intensity, the realization that the case had escalated far beyond a simple missing person investigation, that the stakes were higher, the danger more immediate. He took the post-it note, sliding it into an evidence bag with careful, deliberate movements. The flimsy paper now a crucial piece of evidence. We'll run the number, see what we can find. The attorney's testimony about the threats. It changes the complexion of the case. It gives us a motive, a context for Ryan's actions. A few hours later, Merrick called her back to the station, the urgency in his voice palpable. He sat behind his desk, the clutter of case files illuminated by the harsh fluorescent light, the shadows dancing on the walls. He had the results of the trace, the information pulled from the digital ether. The number connects to a burner phone, Merrick explained, his voice tight, devoid of the earlier skepticism, the frustration evident in his tone. Purchased with cash at a convenience store in Denver 2 weeks before the disappearance. It was active only for a few weeks, then went dead the day after the crash. Untraceable, anonymous. He pulled up the call logs, the screen reflecting in his tired eyes, the data sparse but telling. A digital footprint of a desperate man. The phone showed repeated frantic calls to 2 other numbers in the days leading up to the disappearance. Short calls, frequent, suggesting coordination, planning a conspiracy. He pointed to the first number on the screen, the digits glowing brightly. This one we traced to a known enforcer for the gambling ring Ryan was indebted to, a man named Victor Novak. He's bad news, Leah. Violent, connected to a larger syndicate. We've been tracking him for years, but he's slippery, elusive. The confirmation made Leah's stomach clench. The fear a cold knot in her gut. The threat was real. It had a name. Victor Novak. A name that felt heavy, ominous. A symbol of the darkness that had consumed her life. And the second number? Leah asked, her voice hesitant, almost afraid to know the answer. The hope flickering, threatening to extinguish. Merrick pointed to the second number on the screen. The digit's a cryptic code. This one is also a burner, untraceable. Registered under a fake name, Arthur Dent. Purchased at the same convenience store as the first burner. A coordinated effort to maintain anonymity. He pulled up a map showing the location data associated with the second burner phone. The pings scattered across the digital landscape, but localized to a specific area. The pings are localized to a remote mountainous region in southwest Colorado, near the Gunnison National Forest. A vast wilderness, a place where someone could disappear without a trace. It went dead the same day as the first burner, the day after the crash. The connection was undeniable. Ryan was actively communicating with the criminals threatening his daughter, and simultaneously with an unknown party in the remote mountains. A triangle of communication, a conspiracy of silence, a desperate attempt to navigate the treacherous waters between the law and the underworld. So Ryan was talking to this Arthur Dent person while he was being threatened by Novak, Leah said, trying to process the information, the implications swirling in her mind. The puzzle becoming clearer, more terrifying. Maybe this Dent person was helping him hide Hanukkah, helping him escape, or maybe Dent was part of the extortion. Merrick countered, his pragmatism returning, the skepticism lingering beneath the surface. We don't know the nature of the relationship. We don't know who Arthur Dent is, but this changes the scope of the investigation. The threat against Annika was credible, and Ryan was involved in something far more complex than a simple accident. He was playing a dangerous game. The investigation intensified, the focus shifting from a missing person case to a potential kidnapping organized by dangerous criminals. The urgency palpable, the resources of the department mobilized. But Leah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, that the truth was still hidden beneath layers of deception. If the criminals took Anukika, why the remote location? Why the burner phones? And why a year later was there still no ransom demand, no contact from the kidnappers? The silence was deafening, and it suggested a different kind of conspiracy. A conspiracy born not of greed but of desperation. The knowledge of the organized crime connection paralyzed Leah with a new kind of fear. A fear that transcended the abstract terror of the unknown. It wasn't just the fear of what might have happened to Anukika. It was the concrete fear of Victor Novak, the enforcer, the man who had threatened her daughter's life, the embodiment of the darkness that had consumed Ryan. The image of him conjured from Merrick's description, a brutal, ruthless man who operated outside the confines of the law, haunted her thoughts, his presence, a shadow lurking in the corners of her mind. If they had Anukika, what were they doing to her? Was she safe? Was she alive? But as the initial shock subsided, the paralyzing fear giving way to a desperate need for answers, Leah began to analyze the situation. Her mind grappling with the inconsistencies, the contradictions, the pieces of the puzzle that still didn't fit. Ryan was terrified of the criminals. That much was clear. His desperation was palpable in the frantic calls, the retrieved cash, the staged crash. But he was also terrified of the police discovering the truth. His insistence on the fake amnesia even a year later suggested he was hiding something more than just his debt. He was hiding something that he believed was worth the risk, worth the deception. If the criminals took Annika, Ryan's best move would have been to cooperate with the police, to use their resources to get her back, to enter witness protection, to disappear from the world and start a new life. Unless he believed the police couldn't protect her, or unless he was protecting himself, unless the truth was more complex, more twisted than a simple kidnapping. Leah paced her small apartment, the silence pressing in on her, the walls feeling like a cage. She thought about Ryan's character, his desperation, his manipulative nature, the way he always twisted the truth to fit his needs, his desires. He was a man who always looked for the easy way out, the quick fix, the gamble that promised a big payoff. A man who prioritized self-preservation above all else, even his own daughter. And then a radical theory began to form in her mind, a possibility so unsettling she almost dismissed it immediately. The implications too terrifying to contemplate. A theory that reconciled the contradictions, the inconsistencies, the silence. What if the crash wasn't an accident or an abduction by the criminals? What if it was a diversion? Leah stopped pacing, the implications of the theory hitting her with full force, the breath rushing out of her lungs. What if Ryan staged the disappearance to protect Annika from the debtors? If they believed she was gone, dead, or vanished without a trace, then the threat against her would be neutralized. They couldn't use her as leverage against him. The debt would still exist, the danger to him still present, but the immediate danger to Annika would be gone. The fake amnesia would serve a dual purpose. It would shield him from police scrutiny, preventing them from uncovering the truth about the staged disappearance. And it would provide a plausible explanation for Annika's disappearance to the criminals. A tragic accident, a grieving father incapacitated by trauma, a narrative that absolved him of responsibility, of guilt. If this was true, it meant Anukika was alive. The thought sent a jolt of hope through Leah, a feeling so unfamiliar it almost hurt. The darkness receding for a moment, replaced by a flicker of light. But if Ryan hid Anukika, he couldn't have done it alone. He needed help, someone he could trust implicitly, someone who could disappear completely, leaving no trace, someone who shared his paranoia, his distrust of the world. Who would Ryan trust? Their marriage had been fractured for years. Their social circle diminished by his gambling and her isolation. Their relationship strained by the constant stress of his financial ruin. His relationship with his own parents was strained, distant. Their disapproval of his lifestyle a constant source of tension. Leah thought back, sifting through the wreckage of their shared past, looking for anyone who might fit the profile, anyone who might be capable of such a deception. And then she remembered the ghost in the family, the estranged brother, the shadow figure lurking on the fringes of their life. Jesse Calloway, Ryan's older brother. Leah had only met Jesse once, briefly at their wedding, a fleeting encounter that left a lasting impression. He was a stark contrast to Ryan, quiet, intense, with eyes that seemed to look right through her, radiating a palpable distrust of the world, a rejection of the societal norms that governed their lives. He had left immediately after the ceremony, uncomfortable in the crowd, the celebratory atmosphere feeling forced, artificial. He was eager to return to his isolation, to the wilderness that he called home. Jesse was a survivalist, fiercely anti-government, a man who had chosen to live off the grid deep in the Colorado mountains. His existence a rejection of the modern world, He had cut ties with the family years ago, long before Leah entered the picture. The rift between the brothers deep, irreparable. He had no digital footprint, no permanent address, no connection to the world Ryan inhabited. He was a ghost. He was the one person Ryan might trust who could completely disappear. The one person capable of hiding Anukika from the world, from the criminals, from the police. Leah's mind raced, the pieces clicking into place. The puzzle forming a coherent picture. The untraceable burner phone, the one registered under the fake name Arthur Dent. Pinging in the remote mountains, the Gunnison National Forest. That was the general area where Jesse was rumored to live. The vast wilderness that provided the perfect cover for a man seeking anonymity, isolation. It fit perfectly. Ryan, desperate and cornered, turns to his estranged brother, the only person who could help him execute his desperate plan, the only person he could trust with his daughter's life. Leah immediately started searching for Jesse Calloway. It was like chasing a phantom, a ghost in the machine. He didn't exist in the digital world. No social media, no email address, no phone number, no trace of his existence in the databases that govern modern life. She spent hours online scouring public records, genealogical databases, anything that might give her a lead, a clue to his whereabouts. She found old addresses in small mountain towns, disconnected phone numbers, fragments of a life left behind, a trail of breadcrumbs leading into the wilderness. But nothing recent, nothing concrete, nothing that could help her find him. She needed something tangible, something that connected Jesse to the burner phone, to Arthur Dent, something that proved her theory. She focused on the location data Merrick had provided, the remote area near the Gunnison National Forest, the cluster of red dots on the digital map. She cross-referenced it with the old public records she had found for Jesse, looking for any overlap, any connection, any convergence of the past and the present. And then she found it. A P.O. box in a small town called Silver Creek, deep in the mountains, nestled on the edge of the Gunnison National Forest, a remote outpost on the fringes of civilization. It was registered years ago under the name Jesse Calloway. It was likely inactive, another dead end, another ghost in the machine. But something compelled her to look deeper, a gut feeling, an instinct that told her this was important. She searched for the P.O. box number online, cross-referencing it with the fake name Arthur Dent. It was a desperate gamble, a shot in the dark, a search for a needle in a haystack of information. And there it was, a hit on an obscure, outdated database of P.O. box registrations, a digital echo of a forgotten transaction. The P.O. box in Silver Creek was still active, and the registration had been updated a year ago, just before the disappearance. The timing too precise to be a coincidence. The name on the registration, Arthur Dent. The connection was undeniable. Jesse Calloway was Arthur Dent. He was the one communicating with Ryan. He was the one who had Anna. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The hope surging through her veins, the fear gripping her heart. Anukika was alive, but she was hidden, isolated, beyond the reach of the law, in the hands of a man who had chosen to disappear from the world, and Leah was the only one who knew where she was. Leah presented the connection to Detective Merrick. The evidence laid out on his desk, the circumstantial but compelling links forming a chain of evidence that pointed directly to Jesse Calloway. The estranged brother living off the grid, the burner phone pinging in the same remote area. The P.O. box registered under the same fake name. It was a convergence of facts that couldn't be ignored. Merrick recognized the significance of the lead, the skepticism in his eyes replaced by a focused intensity, the realization that the case had taken a sharp turn, the investigation shifting from a dead end to a viable lead. It's a strong possibility, Leah. It explains the unaccounted time, the remote location, the silence. It fits the profile of a staged disappearance. It gives us a target. But the reality of the situation was complex, fraught with legal and logistical obstacles, the path forward unclear. Jesse Calloway was a recluse living in a remote jurisdiction where the local authorities were stretched thin, their resources limited, their cooperation uncertain. And despite the circumstantial evidence, they still had no concrete proof that Annika was with him, no visual confirmation, no direct evidence of a crime. We can't just raid his property based on a P.O. box registration and a theory, Merrick explained, his frustration evident, the constraints of the law chafing against the urgency of the situation. We need probable cause. We need evidence that a crime has been committed and that Annika is in imminent danger. We don't have that yet. We have a ghost. Leah stared at him, incredulous, the urgency that fueled her unmatched by the slow grind of the investigation, the bureaucracy threatening to derail the search for her daughter. A crime has been committed. Ryan kidnapped her. He staged the disappearance. He lied to everyone. We don't know that for sure, Merrick countered. His pragmatism a wall she couldn't breach. The legal definitions of crime and evidence a stark contrast to the emotional reality of her situation. Ryan still claims amnesia. And if Jesse has her, we don't know the circumstances. Maybe Ryan convinced him that he was protecting her from you. Given the contentious divorce, the accusations, we have to consider the possibility that Jesse believes he is acting in Annika's best interest. The thought made Leah feel sick. The realization of Ryan's manipulative nature hitting her with renewed force. He would use anyone, anything, to achieve his goals, to protect himself, to maintain control. He would poison his own brother against her, twisting the truth into a weapon. So what do we do? Leah asked, her desperation mounting, the fear gnawing at her resolve. We monitor the P.O. box, Merrick said, the plan already forming in his mind, the strategy unfolding. We set up surveillance, see who comes to collect the mail. If we can confirm it's Jesse, and if we can get any indication that Annika is with him, then we can move in. We have to build a case, Leah. We have to do this, right? How long will that take? He pressed, the impatience gnawing at her, the fear of losing Anukika again overwhelming. It could take weeks, Merrick admitted, his honesty brutal, the reality of the situation stark. This is a remote area. Setting up surveillance takes time, resources, coordination with the local authorities, and Jesse is likely paranoid, cautious. He won't make it easy for us. We have to do this by the book, Leah. Otherwise, we risk jeopardizing the entire case. We risked losing her forever. Weeks. Leah didn't have weeks. If Ryan was hiding Annika with Jesse, the renewed police activity, the sudden interest in the case might make him panic. He might contact Jesse, warn him. He might move her again deeper into the wilderness where she would be lost forever. The fragile thread of hope snapping, Leah looked at Merrick, the determination hardening in her chest, the decision forming in her mind. She couldn't wait for the bureaucracy. She couldn't rely on the slow grind of the investigation. The fear of losing Anukika outweighed any risk, any consequence, any law. She made a decision, a desperate gamble, a leap of faith into the unknown. If the police couldn't find Annika, she would have to do it herself. The realization was terrifying but also liberating. She was no longer a victim of circumstance, a grieving mother waiting for answers. She was taking control. She was going to find her daughter. The decision felt both terrifying and inevitable, a gravitational pull towards the unknown, a desperate leap into the abyss. Leah knew she was crossing a line, moving from a grieving mother to something else entirely. A vigilante, a fugitive, a woman operating outside the confines of the law, driven by a primal instinct that transcended reason and fear. But the thought of Annika, isolated in the mountains, perhaps scared and confused, poisoned against her own mother by Ryan's lies, propelled her forward, the urgency overriding any hesitation. She couldn't wait for Merrick. She couldn't risk Anukika being moved again. The fragile threat of hope snapping. She spent the next 24 hours preparing. Her movements methodical, deliberate, the detachment, a defense mechanism against the overwhelming fear. She rented an inconspicuous heavy-duty SUV, a Jeep Wrangler with four-wheel drive, something that could handle the rugged mountain terrain, the unpredictable weather. She packed a bag with warm clothes, hiking boots, food, water, a first aid kit, and a powerful flashlight. The supplies, a meager defense against the vast wilderness. She withdrew a large amount of cash from her savings account, the remnants of the divorce settlement. The money, a tool for survival, for negotiation, for bribery. She was operating on instinct, adrenaline, and a primal need to protect her child. She knew she was out of her depth, that she had no experience in tracking down fugitives, no training in survival skills. She was a suburban mother accustomed to comfort and security. The predictability of her life a stark contrast to the chaos she was about to embrace. But she also knew that no one was more motivated to find Annika than she was. No one loved her more. No one would risk everything for her. Before leaving, she called Detective Merrick. The phone heavy in her hand, the deception tasting like ash in her mouth. She forced a calmness into her voice. She didn't feel the performance worthy of Ryan himself. She told him she was going away for a few days to a retreat in the mountains. A place without cell service, without internet to clear her head, to escape the pressure of the investigation, the agonizing wait for answers. Merrick sounded concerned, urging her to stay safe, to keep her phone on as long as possible, to let him know if she needed anything. The guilt of the deception weighed on her, a heavy stone in her stomach, but she pushed it down, the urgency of her mission overriding any moral qualms. She couldn't afford to be stopped. She couldn't afford to fail. The drive to Silver Creek was long, the cityscape of Denver giving way to the towering peaks of the Rocky Mountains. The scenery breathtaking, the vast expanse of the wilderness, both beautiful and terrifying. But Leah barely noticed, her eyes fixed on the road, her mind focused on the destination, on the daughter waiting for her at the end of the journey. As she drove deeper into the mountains, the roads became narrower, the town smaller, the cell service intermittent, then disappearing altogether, the digital connection to the world severed. She felt a growing sense of isolation, a realization of how far she was from civilization, from help, from the safety of her old life. She was utterly alone. The silence of the mountains was absolute, broken only by the roar of the engine and the pounding of her heart, the sound of frantic rhythm against the stillness of the wilderness. But the thought of Annika, alone and scared, kept her moving forward, the hope. A fragile flame flickering in the darkness. She had reached the point of no return. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through. Silver Creek was less a town than an outpost, a relic of the mining boom, clinging precariously to the side of the mountain, a scar on the otherwise pristine landscape. Nestled in a narrow valley surrounded by towering pines, it consisted of a single main street with a few scattered buildings, a general store, a gas station, a diner, and a small rustic motel. The atmosphere was insular, a place where time seemed to move slower, where the secrets of the mountains were kept hidden, guarded by the locals with a fierce loyalty. Outsiders were noticed immediately, scrutinized with a mixture of suspicion and indifference, their presence a disruption in the quiet rhythm of the town. Leah checked into the motel, the Silver Creek Inn, a rustic establishment with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that buzzed faintly in the silence. The room was small and smelled of pine cleaner and stale smoke, the decor outdated, the atmosphere oppressive. The proprietor, a woman with a weathered face and shrewd eyes, scrutinized her driver's license before handing her the key, her gaze lingering on Leah's face, searching for something. A sign of weakness, a reason to distrust her. She needed information, but she knew she had to be careful. A desperate mother asking questions about a local recluse would raise suspicion quickly. The rumor mill spreading like wildfire through the small town. She had to blend in to become invisible to navigate the treacherous waters of the local culture. She started her reconnaissance at the general store, which also served as the town's post office, the heart of the community, the place where information was exchanged, secrets shared. The interior was dimly lit, cluttered with shelves stocked with canned goods, fishing gear, and hunting supplies. The air thick with the smell of coffee and dust. A man in his 60s with a weathered face and suspicious eyes that mirrored the proprietor of the inn stood behind the counter, his posture rigid, his expression guarded. He was the postmaster, the gatekeeper of the town's secrets. Leah approached the counter trying to appear casual, relaxed, a tourist passing through, seeking refuge from the chaos of the city. She bought a cup of coffee and a local map, spreading it out on the counter, the colorful lines a stark contrast to the rugged reality of the mountains. "I'm looking for a friend of mine," she said, carefully modulating her voice, injecting a casualness she didn't feel, the lie slipping easily from her lips. "He moved up here a while back. Goes by the name Arthur Dent. I was supposed to meet him here, but I lost his address." The postmaster's eyes narrowed slightly, the reaction subtle, but Leah caught it. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked by indifference, a tightening of the muscles in his jaw. Arthur Dent. The name felt heavy on his tongue, unfamiliar yet recognized. Yes, he has a P-box here. I was hoping you could tell me if he's been by recently, Leah said, holding her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The anticipation agonizing. The postmaster shook his head, his expression shuddered, the wall of silence slamming down. The rejection clear. Final. Can't give out that information. Privacy regulations. It's against the law. Leah tried to press him, offering a fabricated story about a family emergency, a debt owed, a desperate need to contact him. But the postmaster remained impassive, stonewalling her attempts, his loyalty to the local recluse, stronger than his sympathy for the desperate woman standing before him. The locals were tight-lipped, protective of their own, especially those who sought refuge in the isolation of the mountains, the ghosts who haunted the wilderness. Leah realized she wouldn't get information easily. She left the store, the small bell above the door ringing cheerfully, a stark contrast to the growing tension in her chest, the frustration mounting. She couldn't force the information out of them. She would have to find another way. She decided to watch the post office to wait for Arthur Dent to appear to confront the ghost she was chasing.
She parked her SUV down the street, partially obscured by a large pine tree, with a clear view of the entrance to the general store.
The location strategic, the visibility clear. She settled in for a long wait, the silence of the town pressing in on her, the isolation amplifying her fear, the suspicion of the locals a palpable presence. She was an intruder in a hostile environment, and she was running out of time. Leah spent 2 days staking out the P.O. box, the monotony of the surveillance agonizing, the waiting a slow torture. 2 long, agonizing days cramped in the front seat of the SUV, the vinyl seat sticking to her legs. The air thick with the smell of stale coffee and exhaustion. The boredom was excruciating, punctuated by moments of intense anxiety. Every passing car a potential threat. Every glance from a local a silent accusation. She sat for hours watching the locals come and go, their movements slow and deliberate, their faces impassive, the rhythm of the town unchanging, indifferent to her desperation. She felt increasingly exposed, conspicuous, a stranger in a town that didn't welcome outsiders, her presence a disruption in the quiet harmony of the mountains. She worried that the postmaster had already warned Jesse if he was even here. The suspicion in his eyes, the shuddered expression, the hostility simmering beneath the surface of his polite refusal. He knew something. He was protecting him. Doubt began to creep in, insidious and paralyzing, the fear gnawing at her resolve. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe Jesse had moved on. The P.O. box a dead end? A false lead? Maybe Anukika wasn't here. The thought was unbearable. A cold dread that settled in her stomach, the hope flickering, threatening to extinguish. On the 3rd morning, as the sun crested the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, the light harsh and unforgiving, a beat-up older model truck pulled up in front of the general store. It was coated in dust, the windshield cracked, the tires worn, a vehicle shaped by the rugged terrain, the harsh weather. A man got out. He was tall, rugged, with a weathered face and a weary demeanor. His movements slow, deliberate. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and hiking boots, his clothes worn and faded. He scanned the street, his eyes lingering on her SUV for a moment, a flicker of suspicion, a silent acknowledgement of her presence before he turned and entered the store. It was him. Leah recognized him instantly, even after all these years. The image of the arranged brother burned into her memory. The intense eyes, the wiry build, the aura of isolation that surrounded him. It was Jesse Calloway. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and hope. The adrenaline surging through her veins. She watched him through the store window, her hands trembling, the coffee cup shaking in her grip. He approached the counter, exchanged a few words with the postmaster. A brief familiar interaction. A silent communication between 2 men who understood the value of secrecy, and then walked to the wall of P.O. boxes. He unlocked the box registered to Arthur Dent and collected a stack of mail. The envelopes a stark white against the drab colors of the store. He then moved to the grocery section, grabbing a basket, his movements efficient, practiced. Leah watched intently as he navigated the aisles, selecting items with a methodical efficiency, the mundane task feeling surreal, terrifying. And then she saw it. He picked up a box of children's cereal, brightly colored loops, the kind Anukika loved, and a gallon of milk. The items a stark contrast to the canned goods and hunting supplies that filled his basket. He moved to the small clothing section, selecting a package of small pink socks. The color a splash of vibrancy in the dimly lit store. Items inconsistent with a man living alone. Her breath caught in her throat. The confirmation visceral, a physical blow that left her reeling. Anaka was here. She was alive. The proof was tangible, real, undeniable. Jesse paid for the items, loaded them into the truck, and pulled away, heading north out of town towards the mountains, towards the wilderness. Leah waited a few moments, her heart hammering, the realization sinking in before starting the SUV. She pulled onto the main road, maintaining a significant distance, the adrenaline surging through her veins, the fear replaced by a fierce determination. She was terrified, the reality of the situation hitting her with full force, the danger immediate, palpable. But the confirmation that Annika was near propelled her forward, the hope overriding the fear. She followed the truck, the dusty trail leading her deeper into the mountains, into the unknown, into the heart of the wilderness where her daughter was hidden. The paved road ended a few miles outside of Silver Creek, the asphalt giving way to a rugged, unforgiving terrain. Jesse's truck turned onto a narrow dirt track, unmarked and winding, the path disappearing into the dense forest. Leah followed, the SUV bouncing violently over the uneven terrain, the branches of the towering pine scraping against the windows, the sound, a jarring intrusion in the silence of the wilderness. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the roar of the engines, the crunch of the tires on the gravel. She had to maintain a careful balance, staying close enough to keep the truck in sight, but far enough back to avoid detection. The tension mounting with every passing mile. The dust kicked up by the truck created a thick cloud obscuring her view. Adding to the tension, the uncertainty. She realized how vulnerable she was, how easily she could be spotted, how quickly the situation could turn dangerous. The terrain became increasingly treacherous, the track narrowing to a single lane, the drop-off on one side steep and unforgiving, the margin for error razor thin. Cell service disappeared completely, the icon on her phone blinking red before fading away. The digital connection to the world severed, a stark reminder of her isolation, her vulnerability. She was utterly isolated. If anything happened, if the SUV broke down, if Jesse spotted her, she was on her own. No backup, no help, no escape. They drove for nearly an hour, climbing higher into the mountains, the air growing colder, the silence deeper, the isolation absolute. Leah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the truck ahead, her mind racing with possibilities, scenarios, outcomes. The fear a cold knot in her stomach. Finally, the truck slowed down and turned onto a narrow driveway, disappearing into the thick woods. The entrance marked only by a small hand-painted sign that read, "Private property. No trespassing." Leah stopped the SUV, her heart pounding, the silence rushing in, the stillness of the wilderness unnerving. She waited a few minutes, listening to the silence of the woods. The only sound, the wind rustling through the pines, and the distant cry of a hawk, the sound echoing across the valley. She pulled the SUV off the track, parking it behind a dense cluster of bushes out of sight, the vehicle concealed by the shadows of the trees. She grabbed her bag, the flashlight, and the keys, and stepped out of the vehicle. The cold air hitting her face, the silence engulfing her. The air was cold, thin, smelling of pine and damp earth, the scent of the wilderness sharp, invigorating. She moved slowly, cautiously, following the driveway on foot. The ground covered in a thick layer of pine needles muffling her footsteps. The silence her ally. After a few hundred yards, she saw it. A secluded cabin nestled in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines, the structure blending seamlessly into the landscape. It was built of dark wood, rustic and formidable, designed for isolation, a fortress against the outside world. Smoke curled from the chimney, a sign of life in the wilderness, a beacon in the darkness. Jesse's truck was parked in front, the dust settling on the hood. Leah stopped, concealed by the trees, observing the cabin, her eyes scanning the perimeter, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of danger. It was smaller than she expected, with a covered porch and small windows, the glass reflecting the fading light of the afternoon. There was no sign of a nukaka, no toys in the yard, no indication that a child lived there. The silence was absolute, the stillness unsettling. She needed to get closer to confirm that Anukaka was inside to find a way to extract her. She circled the cabin, staying low, moving silently through the underbrush, the shadows her cover. The silence of the woods was unnerving, every snap of a twig amplified, every rustle of leaves sounding like a warning, a betrayal. She reached the back of the cabin where there was a small kitchen window, the glass dark, the curtains drawn. She approached cautiously, peering through a gap in the curtains, her breath catching in her throat. The kitchen was rustic, dimly lit by an oil lamp, the shadows dancing on the walls. Jesse was standing at the counter unpacking the groceries, his back to the window. The box of children's cereal was on the counter, a splash of bright color in the drab interior, a symbol of hope in the darkness. Leah scanned the room, her eyes searching for any sign of her daughter, a glimpse of her face, a sound of her voice, and then she saw it. The refrigerator stood against the far wall, an old humming appliance that seemed out of place in the rustic kitchen, a relic of the modern world in the heart of the wilderness. Taped to the door, held in place by a small magnet, was a crayon drawing. It was a colorful, childish depiction of a cabin surrounded by trees. The lines uneven, the colors vibrant. A bright yellow sun shone in the corner, a blue bird perched on the roof, the smoke curling from the chimney in a whimsical spiral. The style was unmistakable, the exuberant colors, the innocent depiction of the world. It was Anukika's drawing. The shock was physical, a jolt that sent tears streaming down Leah's face, the emotion overwhelming, the relief crashing over her like a tidal wave. The relief was so overwhelming it almost brought her to her knees, the strength draining from her legs, the exhaustion hitting her with full force. Anaka was alive. She was inside. The proof was tangible, real, undeniable, but the relief was quickly replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a fierce determination, a primal instinct taking over. She had to get her out. She had to rescue her daughter from the isolation, the deception, the darkness. She observed the cabin, analyzing the layout, the exits, the vulnerabilities. A direct confrontation with Jesse was too risky. He was likely armed. She had seen a rifle rack by the door, the cold steel gleaming in the dim light. Paranoid and hostile, he had lived in isolation for years, his behavior unpredictable, his reaction to her presence uncertain. He wouldn't hesitate to protect his territory, his secrets. She needed to extract Anukika quietly without alerting him, without escalating the situation into a violent confrontation. She continued circling the cabin, looking for a point of entry, a vulnerability, a weakness in the fortress. She noticed a small window on the side of the cabin, slightly ajar for ventilation, the glass dark, the curtains drawn. It was small, narrow, but perhaps large enough for a child to climb through. She needed to wait until nightfall. The darkness would provide cover, the silence amplifying any sound, making Jessie more cautious, but also making her movements harder to detect. She retreated into the woods, finding a concealed spot overlooking the cabin, the rough bark of a pine tree pressing against her back. She settled in for the wait, the hours stretching agonizingly, the silence of the wilderness pressing in on her. The temperature dropped as the sun dipped below the horizon, the cold seeping into her bones, the darkness enveloping the cabin. She watched the lights in the cabin turn on, casting a warm glow into the surrounding darkness, the windows glowing like eyes in the night. She saw movement inside, shadows passing by the windows, the silhouette of Jessie moving through the rooms. She thought about Annika, so close yet still out of reach. The distance between them agonizing. What had Ryan told her? Was she scared? Did she miss her? Did she believe the lies she had been told? The questions tortured her, fueling her impatience, the need to hold her daughter overwhelming. The wait was torture, but the image of the drawing on the fridge fueled her determination. The colorful lines, a beacon of hope in the darkness. She was so close, she couldn't fail. Now, as the night deepened, the silence of the woods intensified, the stillness absolute. The only sound was the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustling of nocturnal animals, the wind whispering through the pines. The air grew colder, freezing, the breath clouding in front of her face. Finally, the lights in the cabin turned off one by one, the darkness reclaiming the space. The cabin was plunged into darkness except for a faint glow coming from the small window on the side. A nightlight. It was time. Leah moved silently toward the cabin, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of pine needles covering the ground. The darkness her ally, the silence her shield. The darkness was both a comfort and a threat, concealing her movements, but also hiding potential dangers. The shadows playing tricks on her eyes. She moved with a deliberation born of terror. Her senses heightened, aware of every sound, every shadow, every breath of wind. She reached the side of the cabin, the small window just above her head, the faint glow of the nightlight illuminating the interior, casting long shadows against the walls. She peered inside, her breath catching in her throat. It was a small bedroom, sparsely furnished, the walls covered in rough wood, a cot, a small dresser, a wooden chair. In the corner on the cot, she saw a small figure curled up under a thick quilt, the fabric rising and falling with the rhythm of her breathing, Anukika. Leia's heart leaped into her throat, the sight of her daughter overwhelming, intoxicating. She pressed her face against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window, the barrier between them agonizing. She looked so small, so vulnerable, a fragile bird in a cage. She whispered her name, praying she wouldn't wake Jessie in the next room, the sound barely audible, a fragile whisper against the silence. "Anukika, baby, it's Mommy," the small figure stirred. The quilt rustling, the movement sending a jolt of adrenaline through Leah. Anukika sat up, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, the darkness hiding her expression. She looked at the window at the face peering through the darkness, the silhouette of her mother framed against the night sky. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice small and hesitant, laced with disbelief, the word hanging heavy in the air. Leah nodded emphatically, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision, the emotion overwhelming. "Yes, baby." "It's me, I'm here. I found you." Annika hesitated, her small body tense, the confusion evident in her posture. She looked toward the door of the bedroom, then back at Leah, the conflict raging in her mind. "Uncle Jesse said you were sick," she whispered, her voice trembling, the words a painful reminder of Ryan's betrayal. "He said I had to stay hidden. He said you couldn't take care of me. He said you didn't want me." The words hit Leah like a physical blow, the depth of Ryan's betrayal staggering, the cruelty of his manipulation breathtaking. He hadn't just hidden Annika. He had poisoned her mind against her own mother. He had told Jessie that Leah was unstable, unwell, that she had abandoned her daughter. The manipulation was complete, the deception absolute. "I'm not sick, baby," Leah whispered, her voice urgent, desperate. The need to reassure her daughter, overriding her anger. Uncle Jesse was wrong. Ryan lied to him. "I'm here to take you home. We have to go now before he wakes up." She needed Anukika to trust her. She needed her to move quickly, silently, the urgency of the situation mounting. She reached up, pushing the window open wider, the hinges creaking slightly. The sound amplified in the silence. Leah froze, listening, her heart pounding in her chest. Nothing. The silence remained unbroken. "Climb out, baby. Quickly, I'll help you. I'll catch you." Anukika hesitated for a moment longer, her eyes searching Leah's face, looking for the truth, the reassurance she desperately needed. Then she nodded, her small face resolute, the trust flickering in her eyes. She scrambled off the bed, dragging the wooden chair to the window, the sound of the wood scraping against the floor agonizingly loud. She climbed up, her small body trembling with fear and cold, the thin pajamas offering little protection against the frigid air. Leah reached in, grabbing her hands, helping her through the narrow opening. The space tight, the extraction difficult. As soon as Anukika's feet touched the ground outside, a powerful motion-activated floodlight snapped on, illuminating the side of the cabin in a harsh white glare. The sudden brightness blinding, disorienting. At the same time, a dog started barking furiously from inside the cabin. a deep guttural sound that shattered the silence of the night. A primal warning that echoed through the mountains. Leah froze, blinded by the sudden light, the sound of the barking echoing in the silence, the fear gripping her heart. They were exposed. They were trapped. The sudden light, the furious barking, shattered the stillness of the night. The silence replaced by a cacophony of chaos and fear. Leah grabbed Anukika's hand, pulling her toward the darkness of the woods, towards the safety of the trees, the instinct to flee, overriding the paralyzing terror. "Run, baby, run," she urged, her voice a frantic whisper, the words swallowed by the barking dog. They stumbled through the underbrush, the branches scraping against their faces, the cold air burning their lungs, the darkness both a refuge and a threat. The adrenaline surged through Leah, masking the fear, the exhaustion, the pain. The cabin door burst open, the sound of the wood slamming against the wall, echoing through the clearing. A figure stood silhouetted against the light streaming from the doorway, a dark shape against the brightness. "Stop," a voice roared, amplified by the silence, raw with fury, the sound vibrating through the air. Leah didn't stop. She kept running, pulling Anukika behind her, deeper into the woods, the darkness swallowing them whole. A shot rang out, the sound deafening, echoing through the mountains, the bullet whistling through the air above their heads. A warning shot fired into the air, a demonstration of power, of control. Leah stopped, realizing the futility of running. He knew the terrain. He was armed. He was desperate. They couldn't outrun him. They couldn't escape. She turned, instinctively, placing herself between the figure and Annika, shielding her daughter with her body, the primal instinct to protect her child, overriding the fear of death. Jesse advanced, leveling the hunting rifle, his face contorted in fury, the shadows dancing on his features, making him look menacing, dangerous. He was barefoot, wearing only jeans and a t-shirt, the cold air seemingly having no effect on him. The dog barked furiously beside him, straining against an invisible leash, the sound echoing the rage in Jesse's eyes. "Get away from her," he roared, his voice raw with emotion, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. "Jesse, stop." "It's me, Leah, Ryan's wife," Leah shouted, her voice trembling but firm, holding her hands up in surrender, a gesture of peace, of desperation. Jesse stopped a few feet away, the rifle steady, pointed directly at Leah's chest, the cold metal, a promise of violence. His eyes were wide, wild, filled with rage and confusion, the conflict raging within him. The floodlight cast long, distorted shadows against the trees, the scene surreal, terrifying. "I know who you are," he spat, his voice dripping with contempt, the words laced with the poison of Ryan's lies. "Ryan told me everything. You're unwell. You lost custody. You're trying to steal her. I won't let you." He genuinely believed Leah was the threat. He believed he was protecting Anuka, fulfilling a promise he had made to his brother, a promise based on a lie. The realization chilled Leah to the bone. Ryan's manipulation had been complete, his betrayal absolute. "He lied to you, Jesse," Leah pleaded, shouting over the barking dog, the desperation bleeding into her voice. "Ryan lied to you. I never lost custody. I'm not unwell. I'm her mother." "Stay back," Jesse warned, his finger tightening on the trigger, the tension mounting, the silence stretching agonizingly. The dog lunged forward, snapping at the air, the sound of its teeth clicking together, echoing in the stillness. Leah held her ground, her heart pounding, the cold metal of the rifle pointed at her heart, the fear, a cold knot in her stomach. She had to make him understand. She had to break through the lies, the manipulation, the paranoia. The truth was her only weapon, the only thing that could save them. "Ryan is in massive debt," Leah shouted, her voice desperate, echoing in the silence, the words carrying the weight of the truth. "He owes money to organized criminals, dangerous people, Victor Novak. They threatened Annika's life. They were going to take her." Jesse hesitated, his brow furrowing in confusion, the certainty in his eyes wavering. This didn't match the story Ryan had told him. Ryan's story had been vague, emphasizing Leah's instability, her erratic behavior, the custody battle, the restraining orders. But this felt terrifyingly real. The desperation in her voice, the fear in her eyes, the specificity of her claims resonating with a truth he couldn't deny. "He staged the crash, Jesse," Leah continued, pressing her advantage, the words tumbling out in a rush of adrenaline and desperation, the truth spilling out of her. "He faked the amnesia. He hid Annika from them, not me. He was trying to protect her." She poured out the details, the evidence she had uncovered, the trail that had led her to this isolated cabin in the wilderness. The burner phone, the one registered under the fake name Arthur Dent, the P.O. box in Silver Creek, the empty lockbox, the missing cash, the threats her divorce attorney had received, the danger that had forced Ryan's hand. "He used you, Jesse," Leah pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "The betrayal hitting him with full force. He manipulated you. He knew you would protect her, that you would keep her safe. But he lied about why. He lied about everything. He put you both in danger." Jesse's eyes darted between Leah and Annika, his confusion deepening, the realization dawning on him. The intensity and specificity of Leah's claims resonated with a truth he couldn't deny. They filled in the gaps in Ryan's story, the inconsistencies he had ignored, the doubts he had suppressed, the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. He looked at Annika, who was now crying, clinging to Leah's leg, her small body trembling, the fear in her eyes, mirroring the confusion in his own. The bond between them was undeniable, primal. This wasn't the behavior of an unstable, dangerous woman. This was a mother protecting her child. The realization that he had been manipulated by his arranged brother, the brother he had trusted, the brother who had reached out to him in desperation, hit Jesse hard. The betrayal was profound, the deception absolute. He had been a pawn in Ryan's desperate game, a tool used to execute his elaborate plan. The rage in his eyes dissipated, replaced by a profound sadness, a sense of defeat, the weight of the truth crushing him. He had been living a lie, his isolation fueled by a deception. He slowly, deliberately lowered the rifle, the cold steel hanging loosely in his hands, the threat neutralized. The silence of the woods rushed back in, the only sound, the whimpering of the dog and Annika's quiet sobs, the stillness of the night, heavy with the weight of the revelation. Jesse looked at Leah, his face etched with defeat and exhaustion. The burden of the past year crashing down on him. The isolation, the responsibility, the fear. It had all been for nothing. "Go," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the word a surrender, a release. "Take her and go. Before they find you." He turned and walked back toward the cabin, the dog following obediently, his shoulders slumped, his movements heavy. He didn't look back. He disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the shadows of the mountains, a ghost returning to the wilderness. Leah didn't hesitate. She grabbed Anukika's hand and fled into the darkness, the adrenaline surging through her veins, the fear slowly receding, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. She had her daughter back. Leah didn't stop running until they reached the SUV, the dark shape, a comforting presence in the darkness. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking violently, the metal cold against her skin, and pushed Anukika into the passenger seat, the small body trembling with cold and fear. She scrambled into the driver's seat, locking the doors, the sound echoing in the silence, a metallic click that signaled their escape, their freedom. She started the engine and drove, the SUV bouncing recklessly down the treacherous mountain tracks, the headlights cutting a swath through the darkness, the wilderness blurring past the windows. She didn't slow down, constantly checking the mirrors, expecting to see headlights behind her. Jesse changing his mind, the criminals emerging from the shadows, the fear still gripping her heart. The drive was a blur, the darkness pressing in. The silence in the car broken only by Anukika's quiet sobs. The sound, a heartbreaking reminder of the trauma she had endured. Leah reached over, stroking her hair, the soft strands feeling like silk beneath her touch, whispering reassurances, the words feeling inadequate against the enormity of the situation. "It's okay, baby. You're safe. Mommy's here. I've got you." She didn't stop until she reached the nearest town with cell service. The icon on her phone lighting up, a beacon of civilization, a connection to the world she had left behind. The lights of the town glowed in the distance, a promise of safety, of normally. She immediately pulled into the local sheriff's office, the lights blazing in the darkness, a symbol of authority, of justice. She stumbled through the doors, Anukiksa clinging tightly to her side, refusing to let go. The warmth of the station a shock after the freezing cold of the mountains. Leah gave a frantic, full statement, the words tumbling out, the events of the past few days spilling out in a rush of emotion. The story of her desperate search for her daughter, unfolding in the sterile environment of the sheriff's office. The sheriff, a man with a kind face and a calm demeanor, listened patiently, his expression grave, the realization of the magnitude of the situation sinking in. He recognized the name Annika Harding, the case that had haunted the state for a year, the missing child whose face had been plastered on every news channel, every missing person poster. They were taken to a local hospital, the sterile environment a stark contrast to the rustic cabin in the wilderness. Anukika was examined, the doctors confirming she was physically healthy, unharmed. A miracle. But the psychological impact of the year-long isolation, the confusion, the fear was evident in her wide eyes, her hesitant movements, her silence. The trauma lingered beneath the surface, a shadow in her eyes. The reunion was overwhelming, a complex tapestry of emotions. Profound relief, the agonizing joy of holding her daughter again, the anger at Ryan's betrayal, the depth of his deception, and sorrow for the lost year, the time stolen from them. The innocence shattered, holding Annika in her arms, the small body pressed against her chest. Leah felt the paralyzing trauma of the past year begin to recede. The void that had consumed her, the emptiness that had defined her life was filled. The silence was broken. In its place was a fierce, clear sense of purpose, a determination that burned brighter than any fear. To heal her daughter, to rebuild their life, to protect her from the darkness that had almost consumed them. The journey ahead would be long, arduous, a path fraught with challenges and obstacles, but they would face it together. The recovery of Annika triggered a massive multi-agency response, the news spreading like wildfire across the state, the nation. Detective Merrick arrived the next morning, coordinating with the local authorities. The relief in his eyes when he saw Leah and Annika palpable, a validation of the desperate gamble she had taken, the risk she had embraced. Tactical teams, armed and ready, descended on the cabin, the helicopters roaring overhead, the silence of the wilderness shattered by the intrusion of the outside world. They found Jesse Calloway sitting on the porch waiting for them. His expression resigned, his eyes empty. He surrendered peacefully, offering no resistance. He was tired of running, tired of the lies, the burden of the secret too heavy to bear. He gave a full confession detailing how Ryan had arrived a year ago, desperate and frantic, claiming Leah was unstable, that she had lost custody, that Anukika was in danger. He admitted to hiding her, believing he was protecting her from her mother. The remorse in his voice genuine, the realization of his manipulation profound. The news of Anukika's recovery spread quickly, the story dominating the local news. The media descending on the small mountain town, the spotlight shining on the darkness that had been hidden for so long. The focus shifted to Ryan Harding. He was arrested at the assisted living facility, the facade of the grieving father crumbling instantly, the mask slipping to reveal the desperate man beneath. When confronted with Anukika's recovery and Jesse's confession, his amnesia defense disintegrated. The fortress of lies collapsing under the weight of the truth. The full truth was finally revealed. The intricate web of deception unraveled. Ryan, cornered by his gambling debts, terrified by the threats against his daughter, had devised a desperate plan, a gamble that risked everything. He intended to retrieve the hidden cash from the marital home, explaining the detour and the empty lockbox, the untraceable funds, a means of survival. In his haste, Anukika's backpack was accidentally left behind in the crawl space, a small mistake that unraveled his entire plan, a forgotten detail that led to his downfall. He then drove to the mountains, handing Anukika over to Jesse, creating a false narrative of Leah's instability, poisoning his brother's mind against her. He staged the crash, intending to create a diversion to make it look like Annika had vanished, neutralizing the threat from the criminals. He injured himself more severely than intended, the physical trauma adding to the credibility of his amnesia defense, the lie becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. He maintained the lie for a year, hoping the criminals would move on. The police would stop searching, and he could eventually retrieve Annika and disappear, starting a new life, free from the debts, the threats, the consequences of his actions. A desperate gamble that failed. Late 2022, the legal proceedings were swift, the justice system moving with a newfound urgency. Ryan Harding pleaded guilty to custodial interference, filing false reports and child endangerment, facing significant prison time, the courtroom silent as he accepted responsibility for his actions. Jesse Calloway, due to his cooperation and genuine belief that he was protecting Anuka, received a lighter sentence, probation and community service, a chance to rebuild his life, to atone for his role in the deception. Leah and Annika moved to a new state, far from Colorado, far from the memories of the past year, the shadows of the trauma. They started intensive therapy, healing the wounds of the betrayal, the isolation, the fear, the process slow, painful, but ultimately transformative. Anuka was resilient, slowly readjusting to the world. Her laughter returning, the shadows in her eyes receding, the innocence gradually restored. Leah, having overcome her deepest fear, dedicated herself entirely to rebuilding their life together. The silence that had once defined her life was replaced by the sound of her daughter's voice. A constant reminder of the strength of a mother's love, the resilience of the human spirit, and the small digital signal that had led her back to her daughter, the 9-foot signal that had guided her through the darkness and into the light.